The snow fell hard on Ashford Manor that night, harder than it had fallen in 20 years. Inside the great house, behind heavy velvet curtains, a duke lay dying. Dr. Whitfield came down the grand staircase slowly, wiping his hands on a cloth. His face said everything before his mouth did. At the bottom of the stairs, the old housekeeper, Mrs. Hobbs, stood waiting with a candle. "He will not see the morning," the doctor whispered. "Someone must send for his wife." Mrs. Hobbs looked at him for a long moment. Then a bitter smile crossed her wrinkled face. "His wife, doctor," she said softly. "Which one, the one who bought him, or the one he destroyed?" Before the doctor could answer, a sound echoed through the frozen hall. Knock, knock, knock. Someone was at the door, at midnight, in a storm that had closed every road in the county. Mrs. Hobbs opened the heavy oak door with trembling hands, and there, on the doorstep, stood a single woman. Snow covered her shoulders. Her face was hidden deep inside a dark hood. She said only 4 words. "Take me to him." But to understand who this woman was, and why her arrival made the housekeeper's candle shake, we must go back. Back 9 years. Back to the night a duke threw away the only person who ever truly loved him. 9 years earlier, Ashford Manor was a different place. The curtains were open then. There was laughter in the halls. And in a sunny room on the 2nd floor, a young woman named Rosalind sat by the window, holding a secret so wonderful she could barely breathe. She was going to have a child. Rosalind pressed her hand against her stomach and smiled. She could already picture Edmund's face when she told him. Her husband, her duke, the man who had married her in a small village church 6 months ago, with only the vicar and 2 witnesses because his mother would never have allowed it. A vicar's daughter, the old Dowager Duchess had once said about her, loud enough for the servants to hear. "My son might as well marry the stable boy's sister." But Edmund had married her anyway. He had held her hands at the altar and promised her forever. "Let my mother rage," he had whispered. "You are worth more than her approval. You are worth more than all of it." Rosalind believed him. God help her, she believed every word. That evening, Edmund was returning from London. He had been gone 11 days, the longest they had been apart since the wedding. Rosalind had the cook prepare his favorite dinner. She wore the blue dress he loved. She practiced the words in the mirror. "Edmund, we are going to have a child." She heard the carriage on the gravel just after dark. But when she ran down to meet him, something was wrong. Edmund did not smile. He did not open his arms. He walked past her into the study without a word, and behind him came his mother, the Dowager Duchess, her black silk dress whispering against the floor like a snake moving through grass. And behind the Dowager came a third person. A woman Rosalind had never seen before. She was beautiful in a cold way, like a portrait, like something made of porcelain and ice. Her gown was the color of dark wine, and diamonds glittered at her throat. She looked at Rosalind the way a person looks at furniture. Then she looked away. "Edmund," Rosalind said quietly, "what is happening?" The study doors closed. Rosalind stood in the hall for 1 hour, then 2. Mrs. Hobbs brought her tea she did not drink. Finally, near 10 o'clock, the doors opened, and a footman said the Duke wished to see her. Inside, Edmund stood by the fire with a glass of brandy. He would not look at her. His mother sat in the great chair like a queen at a trial, and the strange woman stood by the window, calm as Sunday morning. "Rosalind," Edmund's voice was flat, dead. "There is no easy way to say this." "Then say it plainly," Rosalind answered. Her heart had started to pound. Edmund drank the brandy in 1 swallow. "My father left debts I did not know about until this week, the banks in London." He stopped. "Ashford is finished, Rosalind. The manor, the lands, the name, all of it will be gone by spring, unless Unless what? It was the dowager who answered. She smiled, and it was the coldest thing Rosalind had ever seen. Unless my son makes a suitable marriage, the old woman said. May I present Lady Vivienne Harcourt, widow of the late Lord Harcourt. Her fortune is considerable. The room went silent. Rosalind looked from the dowager to the beautiful stranger to her husband, and she laughed a small, disbelieving laugh. Marriage? Edmund is already married, to me. 6 months ago in St. Anne's Church before God and 2 witnesses. Were there, the dowager said softly. Witnesses? How strange, because I have made inquiries, my dear. The curate who performed that little ceremony has left the country. The parish record book has a page missing. And witnesses can be so very forgetful, can't they, especially poor ones. Rosalind's blood turned to ice. Edmund, tell them the truth. And here it came, the moment that would burn itself into her memory for the rest of her life. Edmund set down his glass. He straightened his coat, and he looked at her, finally looked at her with the eyes of a stranger. There was no valid marriage, he said, no proper license, no proper record. Whatever happened in that village church was a youthful mistake. It has no standing. You have no standing. Edmund, you will be given money, a generous sum. You will leave Ashford tonight and you will not speak of this to anyone, ever. Rosalind could not breathe. The floor seemed to tilt under her feet. She heard her own voice as if from far away, and it was shaking. You promised me forever. You held my hands at that altar and you promised. Promises, said Lady Vivienne from the window, speaking for the first time. Her voice was smooth as cream. How sweet. My dear girl, men promise all sorts of things to pretty faces. It is what men do. The clever woman learns the difference between a promise and a contract. She smiled. I have a contract. Rosalind ignored her. She crossed the room and took Edmund's arm, and she said the words she had practiced in the mirror, but not like this, never like this, not as a weapon, not as a last desperate prayer. Edmund, I am carrying your child. For one heartbeat, one single heartbeat, something flickered in his eyes. His mouth opened. And then the Dowager Duchess rose from her chair. Oh, how convenient, she said. The moment the money appears, so does a child. Edmund, my darling, do you see now what she is? Do you see what I tried to warn you about? A vicar's daughter with an ambitious little scheme. The child, if there even is a child, could belong to any farmhand in the county. That is a lie, Rosalind whispered. Edmund, look at me, you know me, you know me. Edmund looked at his mother. He looked at Lady Vivienne, standing by the window with her diamonds and her fortune and her contract. He looked at the portrait of his father above the fire, the father whose debts were drowning him. And then Edmund, Duke of Ashford, turned his back on his pregnant wife. Get her out, he said quietly. The world ended in that moment, not with thunder, not with screaming, just with 2 words in the back of a man's coat. Rosalind did not remember walking to the door. She only remembered that when she reached it, Lady Vivienne's voice stopped her one last time. Girl. Rosalind turned. Vivienne crossed the room slowly, unhurried, and pulled a small silk purse from her sleeve. Then, with a smile of pure honey, she threw it at Rosalind's feet. The coins inside struck the marble floor with a sound like breaking glass. The price of your silence, Vivienne said. Take it. Women like you always do. Rosalind looked down at the purse. Then she looked up, and though her eyes were full of tears, her voice came out steady, steadier than she knew she had in her. Keep your coins, my lady, you will need them. She turned to Edmund's back one final time. And you will remember this night, not tomorrow, not next year, but one day when everything you sold me for has turned to ash in your hands. You will remember that I stood here, carrying your child, and you turned away. No one answered her. She walked out of the study, through the great hall, past the servants who could not meet her eyes, and out the front doors of Ashford Manor into the falling snow. She had no cloak. She had no carriage. She had nothing but the blue dress he had loved and the small life growing inside her. The snow was ankle-deep on the long drive. She was halfway to the gates when she heard someone calling her name, an old voice, breathless, hurrying through the dark. Miss Rosalind, wait." It was Mrs. Hobbs. The old housekeeper came running through the snow without a shawl, her gray hair loose in the wind. She caught Rosalind's cold hands in her warm ones, and her eyes were fierce and wet at the same time. "Listen to me, child," she whispered. "Listen to me now, because we have only a moment. What they did in that room tonight, it was not just cruel. It was a lie. Do you hear me? A lie, and lies can be broken." "Mrs. Hobbs, it's over," he said. Never mind what he said. The old woman pressed something into Rosalind's palm and closed her fingers over it tight. "Hide this. Tell no one you have it. Not your father, not the man you may one day love, not a living soul. Do you understand me?" "What?" "One day, I do not know when, but one day everything will depend on this. Everything." Mrs. Hobbs glanced back at the glowing windows of the manor, and her voice dropped even lower. "There are things in that house, child, things I have seen, things I have written down. When the day comes, you send for me." Behind them, a footman appeared at the manor doors, calling the housekeeper's name. Mrs. Hobbs squeezed Rosalind's hands one last time. "God keep you, brave girl, and God keep the little one." Then she was gone, hurrying back through the snow toward the House of Lies. Rosalind stood alone at the gates of Ashford. She did not open her hand to look at what she held. Not yet. She simply pushed it deep into the pocket of her dress, lifted her chin, and walked out through the iron gates into the dark and the storm. A woman with no husband, no home, and no idea that 9 years later she would stand at those same gates again. But next time, she would not be the one begging. The village of Hartley Green was 30 miles from Ashford Manor, and Rosalind walked, rode farm carts, and walked again for 2 days to reach it. It was the village where she had been born, where her father, Reverend James Whitmore, had preached every Sunday for 30 years, where she had believed in her foolish heart that she could hide until the child came. But scandal travels faster than any carriage. By the time Rosalind knocked on the door of her father's small vicarage, cold to the bone and sick with hunger, the story had already arrived before her. Except it was not the true story. It was the dowager's story. The vicar's daughter had thrown herself at the Duke of Ashford, the gossip said, had tricked him, had claimed a false marriage, had tried to trap a nobleman with a child that could belong to anyone. And the Duke, the poor, honorable Duke, had generously sent her away instead of having her arrested. Her father opened the door. He looked at her for a long time. James Whitmore was a good man, but he was an old man, and he had lived his whole life on his reputation and his faith. Rosalind saw the letters on the table behind him, 3 of them, sealed with expensive wax. She would learn later that one was from the Dowager Duchess herself, regretfully informing him of his daughter's conduct. "Papa," Rosalind whispered, "it's all lies. I was married. I am married. Papa, please." He let her in. He fed her. He did not turn her away. He was not that kind of man. But something in him had cracked, and Rosalind could see it. Half the village stopped attending his sermons. The bishop wrote him a cold letter. Boys threw mud at the vicarage windows after dark. Her father never once said an unkind word to her about it. That, somehow, made it worse. 6 weeks after her return, on a gray Sunday morning, Reverend Whitmore climbed into his pulpit, opened his Bible, looked out at the half-empty church, and pressed his hand against his chest. He was gone before he touched the floor. Rosalind buried her father on a Tuesday. It rained. 9 people came. As she stood at the graveside, 20 years old, 5 months pregnant, alone in the world, she made herself a promise. She would grieve today, only today. Tomorrow she would survive. The new vicar needed the vicarage, of course. Rosalind was given 2 weeks to leave, along with her father's books, his silver cross, and £41, everything he had in the world. She did not stay in Hartley Green. There was nothing there for her but whispers. Instead, she bought a seat on a mail coach heading north, to a place where no one knew her name. She chose the town almost at random, from a map on a coaching-in wall, a small market town in the hills, far from Ashford, far from London, far from everything. The town was called Milford. She told people she was a widow, Mrs. Rosalind Whitmore, whose husband had died of fever. It was hardly even a lie, she told herself bitterly. The man she married was dead. The man living in Ashford Manor with his rich new bride was someone else entirely. She found one room above a bakery, cheap because the chimney smoked. She took in sewing. She stretched her £41 like a miser, and every night she lay in the narrow bed with her hands on her growing belly, and she talked to the child. "We need no one," she would whisper. "Do you hear me, little one? We need no one at all." The child, as if in answer, would kick. Winter came early to the hills that year, and the child came early too. It happened on a bitter evening in late November, 3 weeks before her time. Rosalind was walking back from delivering a mended dress when the first pain struck her, so sudden, so deep, that her legs simply folded. She went down in the snow at the edge of the market square, and when she tried to rise, the second pain came and she could not. The square was empty. The shops were shuttered. The wind howled between the buildings and the snow kept falling, and Rosalind knelt in the road in the dark, gripping her belly, and understood with perfect, icy clarity, we could die here, both of us, right here in the street. "Help," she called, but the wind ate the word. She dragged herself 3 steps, fell again. And then light, a door opening across the square, spilling yellow lamplight onto the snow, a man's voice, "Hello, is someone there?" She could not answer, but she heard boots running through the snow, and then strong hands were lifting her, and a face appeared above hers, a young man's face, plain and serious, with kind eyes and snowflakes in his brown hair. "You're all right," he said. "I have you. I'm a doctor. Do you understand? I'm a doctor, and my surgery is right there, 20 steps, and you are going to be all right." "The baby," Rosalind gasped. "It's too soon." "Babies," said the man, already carrying her toward the light, "are famously terrible at reading calendars. Breathe, madam, just breathe." His name was Nathaniel Gray. He was 28 years old. He had been Milford's doctor for 3 years, and he spent that entire night fighting for the lives of 2 strangers. It was a hard birth. The child was turned wrong, and Rosalind was exhausted and half frozen, and there were hours, long, terrible hours, when Dr. Gray's calm voice was the only thread holding her to the world. "Breathe. Good, again. You are stronger than this pain, madam. I have seen many women, and I am telling you plainly, you are stronger than this pain." Just before dawn, as gray light touched the window, a thin, furious cry filled the little surgery. "A boy," said Dr. Gray, and his tired face broke into a smile. "A small boy with an enormous temper, the best possible combination." He placed the child in Rosalind's arms, and Rosalind looked down into her son's face, and her whole broken heart put itself back together around him in a single beat. He had her fair hair, what little of it there was. He had his father's eyes. "Thomas," she whispered, "after my grandfather, Thomas." Dr. Gray, washing his hands in the basin, glanced over. "A strong name. And your husband, Mrs. Whitmore. Is there someone I should send word to? Family?" Rosalind stroked her son's tiny cheek and did not look up. "There is no one," she said quietly. "It is just the 2 of us. It has always been just the two of us." The doctor studied her for a moment, the way her jaw tightened, the way she held the child like something someone might try to take. He was a quiet man, but he was not a stupid one. He asked nothing more. "Then it's fortunate," he said simply, "that the two of you are the toughest patients I have ever had. Rest now, you're safe here." Safe? Rosalind closed her eyes. She had not felt safe in half a year. She did not believe in it anymore. But she was very tired, and his voice was very steady, and for one night at least she let herself pretend. 200 miles south, on that very same week, the bells of St. George's in London rang for the grandest wedding of the season. The Duke of Ashford married Lady Vivienne Harcourt before 400 guests. The bride wore diamonds that had belonged to a French queen. The Dowager Duchess wept elegantly into a lace handkerchief and told everyone it was the happiest day of her life. And for once, the old woman was telling the truth. Edmund stood at the altar and made his vows in a clear, steady voice. Only Mrs. Hobbs, watching from the back of the church with the senior servants, noticed that his Grace's hands were shaking. And only Mrs. Hobbs saw his eyes as the ring went on, the eyes of a man watching a door close from the wrong side. That night at Ashford Manor, the wedding feast blazed with 1,000 candles. Vivienne's fortune had already begun to flow, the creditors had been paid, the manor saved, the great Ashford name polished and restored. Edmund drank more than he should have. He laughed too loudly at things that were not funny. When at last the guests were gone, he climbed the stairs to the Duchess's chambers, his wife's chambers, and found the door locked. He knocked confused, "Vivienne." The door opened 4 inches. His new bride stood there in the candlelight, still wearing her diamonds, calm as frost. "Yes, Your Grace." It is our wedding night, madam." "So it is." Vivienne smiled pleasantly. "And you have had your wedding, and I have had my title. A very successful evening for us both, I should think." Edmund stared at her. "I don't understand." "Then let me be perfectly clear, since clarity between partners is so important." She leaned against the doorframe, and her voice stayed light and cool and horribly polite. "You needed money. I needed a duke, the doors that open, the rooms one is admitted to, the things a title makes possible. We have both received exactly what was promised. But do search your memory of our arrangement, Your Grace, and tell me." Her smile sharpened by 1 degree. "Was love in the contract?" "I confess, I don't recall the clause." "Vivienne." "Good night, Your Grace. Do sleep well. You have everything you wanted." The door closed. The lock turned a small, neat, final little sound. And Edmund, Duke of Ashford, stood alone in the corridor of the house he had sold his soul to save, and understood for the first time exactly what he had purchased. The new Duchess wasted no time making the manor her own. Within a month, she ordered the last traces of the past swept away, old papers, old portraits, old letters. "A new house," she announced, "for a new mistress." A footman was set to burning boxes of the late Duke's correspondence in the courtyard. Vivienne supervised personally, wrapped in furs, watching the flames with mild satisfaction. It was pure chance that made her glance into the final box. Pure chance that a corner of cheap paper caught her eye among the expensive stationery. A letter with no seal, no crest, addressed in a careful churchman's hand to His Grace the Duke of Ashford, private and most urgent. Vivienne plucked it out and read it, right there in the cold courtyard. She read it twice. Whatever was written in that letter, it made the new Duchess of Ashford go very still. Her eyes moved to the manor's upper windows, where her husband's study glowed with lamplight, then back to the paper in her gloved hand. The footman reached for it. "Into the fire, Your Grace." "No." Vivienne folded the letter slowly, precisely, and slid it into her fur muff. When she looked up, she was smiling, the same honey-sweet smile she had worn while throwing coins at a ruined girl's feet. No, this one I shall keep. One never knows, Simmons, when an old piece of paper might become. She considered the word and chose it with pleasure. Useful. She walked back into the manor, and the fire burned on behind her, and somewhere 200 miles north, a baby with a duke's eyes slept in his mother's arms above a bakery, in a town where nobody knew that either of them existed. For now, 5 years passed. And if you had visited the market town of Milford in those days and asked anyone, the baker, the blacksmith, the ladies coming out of Sunday service, about the widow Whitmore, you would have heard the same thing from every one of them. Ah, Mrs. Whitmore, now there is a woman. The little shop stood on the corner of Church Lane, with a green door and a hand-painted sign, RWHITMORE, HERBS and Remedies. Inside, the walls were lined floor to ceiling with jars and bottles, dried lavender hung from the beams, and behind the counter stood a woman not yet 30, with steady hands, kind eyes, and a spine of pure iron. It had not come easily, nothing ever had. She had started with nothing but a rented room and a memory, the memory of long-ago afternoons in the still room at Ashford Manor, when a young bride with nothing to do had followed the old housekeeper around like a duckling. It was Mrs. Hobbs who had taught her in those 6 short months everything a great house knew about healing, which root eased a fever, which leaf calmed a cough, how to read a plant the way other people read a book. A lady should know these things, Mrs. Hobbs used to say, grinding dried herbs with her strong old hands. Fine gowns wear out, child. Knowledge never does. Rosalind had thought it a pleasant way to pass the time. It turned out to be the thing that saved her life. She had begun small, a cough syrup for the baker's wife, a salve for the blacksmith's burned hand. Word traveled. Within 2 years she had the shop. Within 4, farmers' wives were walking 5 miles to see her, and even Dr. Gray sent patients her way for the small ailments, and the town that had once known nothing about her now could not imagine itself without her. Nobody in Milford asked about her past anymore. In their eyes her story was simple. A good woman, widowed young, raising a fine boy on her own 2 feet. And oh, what a boy he was! Thomas Whitmore, 5 years old, was the unofficial king of Church Lane. He was fair-haired like his mother, quick to laugh, quicker to ask questions, endless, impossible questions, and he had a habit that melted every grown heart in town. Whenever he saw someone carrying something heavy, he would run over on his short legs and announce, "I will help. I am very strong." He had his mother's smile. He had someone else's eyes, dark, deep gray, striking under the fair hair. Sometimes, in a certain light, when Thomas frowned in concentration over his wooden soldiers, Rosalind would catch a glimpse of that other face, that other life, and her heart would clench like a fist. Then Thomas would look up and grin and be entirely, only hers again. "Mama," he asked one evening as she tucked him into bed above the shop, "Billy Fletcher has a papa. Why don't I have a papa?" Rosalind had known this question was coming for 5 years. She had rehearsed 100 answers. When the moment came, she used none of them. "You had one," she said quietly, smoothing his hair. "He is gone. But listen to me, my love, because this is the important part. You have a mother who loves you enough for 10 papas, 12 grandmothers, and at least 1 small dog." Thomas considered this seriously. "Can we get the dog?" "Absolutely not." "But you said—" "Sleep, Your Majesty." And Thomas slept, safe and warm above the little shop, knowing nothing of manors or dukes or diamonds, and being, quite possibly, the happiest child in England. There was one more person on Church Lane whose story must be told, and that person had spent 5 years being, quietly and hopelessly, in love. Dr. Nathaniel Gray had never said a word about it. He was not that sort of man. But the whole town saw what the widow Whitmore somehow did not, that the doctor found a reason to walk past the green door every single day, that he saved his best jokes for Thomas, who worshipped him, that at the summer fair, when Rosalind laughed at something, Nathaniel Gray looked at her the way other men look at sunrises. "You ought to just ask her, doctor," the baker's wife told him once, bold with Christmas wine. "Everyone knows, everyone but her." "Ask her what, Mrs. Pole?" said the doctor mildly, and changed the subject. But that spring he came close. It was a soft April evening. He had walked Rosalind home from a sick call they had attended together, a farmer's child with fever, saved by his skill and her tinctures working side by side, as they had so many times. They stopped outside the green door. Thomas's candle glowed in the upstairs window. Rosalind. He almost never used her Christian name. She looked up, surprised. Nathaniel turned his hat in his hands like a nervous schoolboy, this man who could set a bone without blinking. "I have wanted to say, that is, I have been meaning to ask for some considerable time now." "Nathaniel," she said it gently, so gently, and that gentleness was its own answer, and they both heard it. He stopped. Rosalind looked at the ground, and when she spoke, her voice was low and even, an old wound speaking. "I trusted a man once, doctor, with everything I had and everything I was, and it was not I who paid the worst price for it, it was my son. He paid it before he was even born." She met his eyes at last. "I will not gamble him again, not on any man, not even the finest man I know." A long silence stood between them in the April dusk. "Well," said Nathaniel Gray at last. He put his hat back on. "Then the finest man you know will say good night, and he will be here tomorrow and the day after that exactly as always. Some things, Mrs. Whitmore, are not gambles." He smiled a little. "Some things are certainties. Good night. Good night, Thomas." He called up at the window, and a delighted small voice shouted back, and he walked away down Church Lane in the twilight. Rosalind stood at her door for a long moment. "Some things are certainties." She went inside and bolted the door, the way she bolted everything. 200 miles south, behind the tall windows of Ashford Manor, a duke was beginning to die, though no one had told him yet. It had started that winter, small as a whisper. Edmund found he tired easily. His hands, holding the newspaper, developed a faint tremble. Food lost its taste. His stomach turned traitor. His sleep filled with strange, heavy dreams. "You work too hard, my darling," said his wife. Their marriage, 5 years on, had settled into a cold and perfect performance. In public, the handsome Duke and his brilliant Duchess, the envy of society. In private, two strangers on opposite ends of a long dinner table. Vivienne ruled the manor, the accounts, and the social calendar. Edmund signed what he was given to sign, drank a little more each year, and grew old at 34. But in one matter, and everyone remarked how touching it was, the Duchess was devotion itself. Every evening at 9 o'clock, Vivienne prepared her husband's tonic with her own hands. She allowed no servant to touch it. It was her ritual, the little silver tray, the crystal glass, the dark bottle from her private cabinet. A restorative, she said, was made from a receipt of her late first husband's physician. "Your health, Edmund," she would say, watching him drink it down, and she would smile. "You are good to me, Vivienne," Edmund said one such evening, wiping his mouth. His voice had gone quieter these past years, almost humble. "Better than I deserve, I think." The Duchess tilted her head, considering him the way one considers a ledger. "Yes," she agreed pleasantly, and took away the empty glass. By spring the tremble had spread to both hands. By summer he could not ride. His hair thinned, his skin took on a grayish cast, strange white lines appeared across his fingernails, faint as ghosts. London's finest physicians came and puzzled and prescribed rest and took their fees and left. And every evening at 9 o'clock, the little silver tray. "Your health, Edmund." It was in September that the letter came, the one that lit the fuse under everything. It was from the offices of Mr. Pettigrew, the old family lawyer who had served 3 Dukes of Ashford across 40 years. Mr. Pettigrew was gravely ill, the letter said. He wished to see his Grace. It was, the letter said, a matter of conscience. Edmund traveled to London on a grey, wet morning, weak as he was. Something in that phrase would not let him rest. He found the old lawyer propped on pillows in a dim room, shrunken to bones, his breath rattling like dry leaves. "Your Grace," Pettigrew's eyes still sharp in the ruined face fixed on him. "Good, good, there is time then, send the nurse out." The door closed. The old man gathered his strength. "9 years ago," he began, before your marriage to her Grace was arranged, you were shown a letter. Do you remember it?" Edmund went very still. He remembered. God help him, he had spent 9 years trying not to. It had come the same week the debts were discovered, the same terrible week. A letter placed in his hands, in handwriting he did not know, describing in plain, filthy detail the vicar's daughter's conduct with another man. Proof, his mother had called it, holding his shoulder while he read. Proof of what that scheming girl truly is. You owe her nothing, Edmund. Nothing. He had wanted to disbelieve it. And then the bankers had come, and Vivienne's fortune had glittered, and disbelieving it had become inconvenient. So he had chosen to believe. He had built his whole betrayal on that foundation, brick by brick, and then sealed the room and never entered it again. "I remember," he said hoarsely. The old lawyer's hands twisted the bedsheet. "It was false," he said, "forged, every word of it. I have known for 9 years, your Grace, and I am going before my judge, and I will not carry it further. The letter was written by a hired hand, a man brought up from London, paid in cash, sworn to silence. There was no other man, there was never any other man. The girl was innocent." The room tilted. Edmund gripped the arms of his chair with his trembling, gray-tinged hands, and the whole edifice of 9 years, every justification, every brick came down in silence, all at once, inside him. Who, his voice did not sound like his own. Who paid for it, who ordered it written? Pettigrew opened his mouth. And the breath rattled out of him, one long, dry, terrible sound, and did not draw in again. The sharp old eyes fixed on a point somewhere past Edmund's shoulder and emptied. Who? Edmund was on his feet, gripping the dead man's shoulders, shouting into the silence. Who? But Mr. Pettigrew had gone to his judge, and taken the name with him. And the Duke of Ashford stood alone in the dim room, shaking, a poisoned man who did not know he was poisoned, a betrayed man who had just learned he was also a betrayer of the innocent. And one thought rose through the wreckage of him, one thought that would drive everything that came after. Find her. The Duke of Ashford came home from London, a different man. The servants noticed it at once. His Grace, who for years had drifted through the manor like a polite ghost, was suddenly awake. He shut himself in his study for hours. He wrote letters and burned the copies. He met twice with a quiet, gray-coated stranger who arrived after dark and left before dawn, and whose name appeared in no visitor book. The stranger's name was Mr. Crane. His profession was finding people who did not wish to be found. A woman, Edmund told him at their first meeting. Rosalind Whitmore, a vicar's daughter from Hartley Green. She left there 9 years ago. I need to know where she is. And Mr. Crane, the Duke's trembling hands flattened on the desk, no one is to know of this. Not my household, not my mother, not, he paused, not my wife, especially not my wife. Do you understand? Mr. Crane understood. Mr. Crane was paid extremely well to understand. But the trail, he soon reported, was cold as a 9-year grave. In Hartley Green, a dead father, an emptied vicarage, and neighbors who remembered only that the disgraced girl had gone north, someone said. On the mail coach, someone said. And after that, nothing. No letters, no records. England was wide, and a woman who wished to disappear into it could do so entirely. She may have changed her name, Your Grace. They usually do. Keep looking. It may take considerable time. Edmund looked down at his own hands, thinner every month, grayer every month, the white ghost lines plain across every fingernail now. Time. Time was the one thing he could not buy, and he did not even know why. Then do not waste any of it, he said. Keep looking. The search took 2 years. 2 years of false trails and dead ends. 2 years in which the Duke's strange illness tightened its grip, retreating for a month, returning worse, baffling every physician in the south of England. 2 years in which he learned to walk with a cane at 36, and learned to endure his wife's tonic with a hidden grimace, and his mother's watchful eyes, and the long silences of a house where nobody loved him. He never told anyone why he kept going, but he knew. It was the last thing in the ledger of his life that could still be put right. He did not hope for forgiveness. He had lost the right to hope for it in a single evening 9 years ago between one glass of brandy and the next. He hoped only to stand in front of her once and say the words, I know the truth now. I know what was done to you. Some of it was done to me too, but I chose to believe it, and that choice was mine, and I am sorry. A man can walk a long way on a sentence like that. Even a dying man. In the end, it was not Mr. Crane who found her. It was chance, or fate, or, as Mrs. Hobbs would say much later, nodding slowly by the fire, it was the Lord's own bookkeeping child, for he leaves no account unsettled. It happened because of a mill. Among the many properties in the Duchess Vivienne's fortune was a woolen mill in the northern hills, inherited from her first husband. That autumn, the mill's aging manager wished to retire, papers required signing, and the Duchess, occupied in London, and finding her sickly husband tiresome, decided the errand was precisely suited to him. The air will do you good, Edmund. My man Simmons will accompany you and see to everything. Simmons, the tall footman with the soft voice, who had stood beside Vivienne at a courtyard 5 years before. The Duchess never sent her husband anywhere without Simmons. And so it was that, on a bright, cold Michaelmas morning, the Duke of Ashford's carriage rolled into a northern market town he had never heard of in his life. A little town called Milford. It was Fair Day, the famous Michaelmas horse fair, the biggest day of Milford's year. The square was a glorious chaos of horses and ribbons and gingerbread stalls, fiddle music and shouting farmers, children running everywhere like spilled marbles. The mill business took until noon. Afterward, Edmund, tired, aching, but strangely unwilling to climb back into the dark carriage, told Simmons he wished to walk a little through the fair, alone. Simmons bowed, and followed at 40 paces, as he had been instructed to do since London. Edmund moved slowly through the happy crowd, leaning on his cane, a gray ghost at a feast, and it struck him, watching the plain and cheerful faces around him, that he could not remember the last time he had heard so much laughter in one place. Ashford Manor, with its 40 rooms, did not contain this much laughter in a year. He was thinking exactly that thought when a cannonball struck him. The cannonball was approximately 4 feet tall, moving at tremendous speed after an escaped piglet, and looking backward over its shoulder while running forward, a method of travel favored by 8-year-old boys since the beginning of time. The collision was total. Edmund's cane went one way, his hat another, and the Duke himself sat down hard on the cobblestones, the breath knocked clean out of him. Oh no, oh no. The cannonball scrambled up, piglet forgotten, face stricken. Sir, sir, I am so sorry, sir, are you hurt? I wasn't looking, it was the pig's fault. Well, it was my fault and the pig's. I am quite unharmed, Edmund managed, though his hip said otherwise. The boy retrieved the cane and the hat with lightning efficiency, then planted himself, held out both hands, and announced with tremendous seriousness, I will help you up, I am very strong. And despite everything, The pain, the exhaustion, the sickness knowing him hollow. Edmund, Duke of Ashford, laughed. A real laugh, rusty from disuse. He took the small hands and allowed himself to be hauled with mighty 8-year-old effort to his feet. "There," said the boy, satisfied, dusting him off with brisk pats. "Good as new. You should be more careful, sir. Fair day is dangerous." "Evidently. You have saved my life, young man. May I know the name of my rescuer?" "Thomas, sir, Thomas Whitmore." The world stopped. Afterward, Edmund could never say which came first, the name or the eyes, because he was already looking into the boy's upturned face when the name landed, already seeing what was there to be seen. The fair hair, her smile, her way of tilting the head and looking out from underneath it all, dark gray and deep-set and utterly unmistakable. The eyes that Edmund had seen in his own mirror every day of his life. His father's eyes. His grandfather's eyes, glaring down from the portrait above the fire. Ashford eyes. "Whitmore," Edmund heard himself say from somewhere far away. His heart was slamming against his ribs. "And your father, Thomas, is he here at the fair?" "My papa died, sir, before I was born. It's just Mama and me." The boy said it simply, matter of fact, and then his whole face lit like a lamp looking past Edmund's shoulder. "There's Mama. Mama, I knocked down a gentleman but I fixed him." Edmund turned. And there she was. 9 years. 9 years of guilt he had refused to look at, 2 years of searching, 100 imagined versions of this moment. And none of it had prepared him for the simple, physical fact of her, standing 10 feet away in the autumn sunlight with a market basket on her arm. She was older. She was, if anything, more beautiful, but it was a different kind of beauty than the soft girl he had married. This was the beauty of oak, of things that have stood through weather. And she had gone white to the lips, and the basket had slipped from her arm, and apples were rolling away unnoticed between the cobblestones. "Rosalind," his voice broke on it. For a moment she did not move at all. Her eyes went from him to Thomas to him, and Edmund watched the terror flood into her face and understood with a fresh knife of shame what she was seeing. Not a lost love, not even an old enemy. A threat standing 3 feet from her son. "Thomas," her voice came out low and perfectly steady, and it was the steadiness of a mother stepping between her child and a wolf. "Come here to me, now." "But Mama, I knocked him down, I have to." "Now." Thomas went, bewildered. Rosalind put her hand on his shoulder and drew him behind her, actually behind her, her body between the boy and the Duke. And for 3 endless seconds she looked at Edmund across the cobblestones. 9 years of winter were in that look. "Rosalind, please, one word." Edmund took a step, hand outstretched. She turned. Without one word, without a single word, which was worse than any word could have been. She took her son's hand and walked away into the fair day crowd, quickly, not running, never running, and the crowd folded around them like water, and they were gone. "Mama, who was that man? Mama, you're squeezing." "No one, my love," a stranger walked quickly. Edmund stood alone among the rolling apples, his hand still half raised, shaking from head to foot. "My papa died before I was born." He made himself do the arithmetic then, standing in the middle of the happy, roaring fair. The boy was 7, perhaps 8 years old. 9 years ago, on a snowing night, in a warm study, a young wife with tears on her face had said the words, "I am carrying your child," and Edmund, Duke of Ashford, had turned his back and said, "Get her out." He had not merely cast off an innocent wife. He had a son. He had a son, that bright, laughing, gallant little boy, and the boy believed his father was dead, and the boy's mother had just looked at him the way honest people look at plague. The Duke made it to a shadowed gap between 2 stalls before his legs gave way. He gripped the wooden post and stood there, a great man in a fine coat, hidden from the crowd, and wept as he had not wept since he was Thomas's age. He did not see Simmons. 40 paces back, half-turned toward a ribbon stall, the Duchess's man had watched the entire scene from beginning to end: the collision, the boy, the white-faced woman, the outstretched hand. Simmons could not have heard the words. Simmons did not need the words. Simmons had been chosen for this work precisely because he could read a story at 40 paces. That evening, while the Duke sat wordless and shattered at the inn, Simmons composed a short letter in the neat, small hand the Duchess paid him for, and sent it south by the night mail. It reached Ashford Manor 2 days later, on a silver tray, beside the Duchess's morning chocolate. Vivienne read it once. In Milford this Michaelmas fair day his Grace met with a woman fair-haired, a shopkeeper of this town, as I have since learned, called the Widow Whitmore. His Grace was greatly moved. Madam, there was a boy with her. I judge him 7 or 8 years of age. Madam, I have seen his Grace's family portraits, and I write plainly, the boy has the Ashford eyes. The morning room was very quiet. Outside the tall windows, gardeners were sweeping the first dead leaves from the terrace. Vivienne set down the letter. She picked up her glass of wine. She had lately taken wine with breakfast, and her grip tightened and tightened, white-knuckled, until with a small, bright, vicious crack, a line split up the crystal and wine bled through onto the white cloth like something wounded. The Duchess did not appear to notice. She was looking at nothing at all, and her face had gone smooth and still and thoughtful, which those who knew her best had learned to fear far more than any rage. So she said softly to the empty room, "The child lives." She rose, rang the bell, and began, calmly, methodically, the way she did everything, to arrange the destruction of a widow and a little boy in a town called Milford. The Duke of Ashford did not go home. He sent Simmons south with the carriage and the mill papers and a short letter for the Duchess. The northern air agrees with my health. I remained some days longer, and he took a room at the Milford coaching inn under the plain name of Mr. Edmund Ashe. He knew, of course, that Simmons would report everything. He no longer cared. A man who has just discovered he has a son does not think about footmen. For 2 days, Mr. Ashe did nothing but stand at his window, watching the little town go about its life, gathering his courage the way a beggar gathers coins. On the 3rd morning, he walked to Church Lane. The shop with the green door was busy. It was always busy. Through the window he could see her, wrapping a parcel for a farmer's wife, laughing at something, entirely at home in the world she had built out of the ruins he had made. Edmund stood across the lane for a long time before his legs would carry him over. The little bell above the door sang. The shop went quiet. Rosalind looked up from her counter. For a heartbeat her face was simply naked, shock, fear, fury, all at once. Then it closed like a strong-box. "Mrs. Pole," she said calmly to the baker's wife at the counter, "would you excuse me one moment?" She came around the counter, walked past Edmund as if he were a coat rack, and held her own shop door open to the street. "We are closed to you, sir," she said. "Good day." "Rosalind." "Good day." He went. What else could he do, with the baker's wife staring and his son possibly upstairs? He went and came back the next day and was turned away and came back the day after that. By the 4th day, all of Milford knew that a fine, sick-looking gentleman from the south was troubling their Mrs. Whitmore, and Milford did not like it. Shopkeepers stopped greeting him. The innkeeper grew cold. On the 5th morning, as Edmund crossed the square toward Church Lane yet again, he found his path quietly blocked by the town blacksmith, a mountain of a man named Fletcher, with forearms like ship's rope and a voice like gravel sliding. "Begging your pardon, sir," said Fletcher, not begging anything at all. "But it seems to me Mrs. Whitmore has said her good days to you several times over. She's got friends in this town, sir, a great many friends. Perhaps the southern air would agree better with your health." And Edmund, Duke of Ashford, who owned 40 rooms and outranked everyone he had ever met, looked up at the blacksmith and felt, absurdly, something almost like gladness. She has friends, a whole town of them. She built that too. You are quite right to warn me, he said quietly. She deserves such friends, but I cannot leave, not yet. And then, in the middle of Milford's Market Square, on a gray October morning, in front of the blacksmith and the baker's wife and 24 astonished townspeople, the sick gentleman from the south did something no one in that town would ever forget. He walked the last 50 yards to the green door, where Rosalind had just stepped out, drawn by the gathering murmur, and he took off his hat, and he set down his cane. And he lowered himself, stiffly, painfully, onto both knees on the wet cobblestones. "Rosalind Whitmore," he said, in a voice pitched to carry the voice of a man deliberately burning every bridge behind him. "9 years ago, I did you a wrong so great that God himself must have looked away. I broke a holy vow. I called you a liar when you spoke the truth. I took everything from you and gave it to people who were not worthy to touch the hem of your dress. I have no right to your forgiveness, and I am not here to ask for it. I am here so that this town, your town, may know what you never told them, that you were wronged, madam. Entirely, completely wronged. And the man who wronged you kneels here in the dirt where he belongs and begs only to be heard for 5 minutes. After that, if you wish it, I will go, and you will never see my face again." You could have heard a leaf fall in that square. The whole street stared at the kneeling gentleman, at the white-faced woman in the shop doorway. Somewhere a shutter creaked. Half of Church Lane was leaning out of its windows. Rosalind stood very still, and those close enough saw that her hands, gripped together at her waist, were trembling, though her face was carved from stone. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, but quiet the way winter is quiet. "Tell me one thing first, sir, just one." She came down a single step. "For whom did you come all this way? Did you come for the woman who was thrown out of your doors into the snow 9 years ago, carrying your child?" A pause. "Or did you come for your own conscience so it might let you sleep at last?" She let the question stand in the cold air. "Because I must tell you, sir, you have wasted a journey either way. Neither of them lives here. The woman you threw away died that night on your driveway. And your conscience," her voice did not rise, and that was the terrible thing, "your conscience is not my patient. I do not treat it. There is no remedy for it on my shelves." A low sound went through the crowd. The blacksmith folded his arms. Somewhere Mrs. Pole whispered, "Lord above, it's him. It's the one." Edmund took it, knelt there on the stones and took every word like a man standing under falling masonry, and did not defend himself, and did not get up. "Then let me say my 5 minutes to the woman who lives here now," he said, "because she too was lied to, not only by me. There is something you do not know, Rosalind, and when I have said it, you may shut the door forever." Perhaps it was the words. Perhaps it was the gray sky threatening rain on a sick man's bare head. Perhaps it was simply that Rosalind Whitmore had spent 9 years being stronger than her own heart, and even iron bends. "5 minutes," she said. "In the shop. Off your knees, sir, you are frightening my customers." Inside, among the lavender and the bottles, she did not offer him a chair. He stood, leaning on his cane, and told her. He told her about the letter, the forged letter in a stranger's hand describing her supposed sins placed before him in the very week the debts had swallowed everything. He told her about old Pettigrew, dying in his bed in London, gasping out 9 years of guilt. Forged, every word, a hired hand from London. The girl was innocent. There was never any other man. He told her the lawyer had died with the name of the guilty unspoken. Rosalind listened with her arms folded, and her face never moved, and inside her chest something old and scarred tore slowly open. "So," she said at last, "you were shown a lie about me, and you believed it." "Yes." You, the man who woke beside me for 6 months, who knew me." Her voice frayed for the first time one thread. "You believed it." And here, to his single credit, Edmund did not reach for the excuse that was sitting there, waiting to be picked up. He said, "That is the truth I have had to swallow, Rosalind, and I will not spare myself in front of you. I did not believe it, not truly, not in the part of a man where believing happens, but your innocence had become expensive. The lie was convenient and the debts were real and Vivienne's fortune was real, and so I chose to believe it the way a man chooses a coat. That is what I am. That is what I have been living with." His hand whitened on the cane. "The letter does not excuse me. Nothing excuses me. It only means there is someone else, someone who planned it, paid for it, and has watched us both burn for 9 years. And I intend to find out who, with whatever time I have left." Whatever time. Rosalind stopped. She had been too angry until that moment to truly look at him. Now she did, with a healer's eyes this time, not a wounded woman's, and what she saw made her go cold in a different way. The gray-tinged skin, the wasted frame, the tremor in the hand on the cane, constant as a heartbeat. "You are ill," she said slowly. "I am dying," said Edmund, quite simply, as if reporting the weather. 2 years now. The finest physicians in London cannot name it. It comes, it goes, and each time it comes it takes a little more of me. I did not come north for my health, Rosalind, whatever I wrote to my wife. I came because a dying man wanted one thing before the end." His voice, which had held through all the rest, finally cracked. "I do not ask you to forgive me. I do not ask to be his father. I lost that on the night you speak of. I ask only to know him, a little, from whatever distance you set. He hauled me up off those cobblestones, Rosalind, with those little hands. He said he was very strong." The Duke pressed his fist to his mouth and could not go on. The clock ticked on the shop wall. Outside, the gray afternoon leaned against the windows. "Your 5 minutes are done," Rosalind said at last, very quietly. "I will not answer you today. Go back to the inn, sir. You will have my answer when I am ready to give it, and not 1 hour before. That is more mercy than I was ever shown. Take it and go." He bowed his head and went. And Rosalind locked the shop door, climbed halfway up her own stairs, sat down where Thomas could not see her, and shook for a long, long time. That evening, she did something she had never done in 9 years. She told someone everything. Nathaniel Gray sat in her small parlor as the whole story came out: the church at St. Anne's, the study at Ashford, the snow, the coins at her feet, her father's grave, all of it. And the doctor listened the way he did everything. Quietly, completely, his tea going cold and forgotten in his hands. Not once did he interrupt. Only his knuckles, slowly whitening around the cup, betrayed him. "And now he is here," Rosalind finished, hollow-voiced, "kneeling in my street, telling me he was deceived as well, telling me he is dying, asking to know my son. And I do not know what is true any more, Nathaniel, or what is owed, or what is right. I came to you because," she laughed shakily, "because you are the only certainty I have." Nathaniel set down his cup. When he trusted his voice, he said, "Tell me about this illness of his, as you saw it. You have the best eyes in this county after mine. Tell me exactly." Rosalind blinked at the strange turn, but obeyed, the healer in her taking over. Wasted, badly wasted, 3 stone lost at least. Skin with a gray cast to it like tallow, tremor in both hands constant. His hair thin, a man of 36 with the hair of 60. He said it comes and goes in waves, retreats, then returns worse. 2 years of it. And she frowned, remembering the hand clenched white on the cane. His nails. White lines across every nail. Straight across, all of them like rings in a tree. She looked up. Nathaniel Gray had gone absolutely still, and his face, his kind, mild, unshockable doctor's face, had changed into something she had never seen on it in 9 years. Slowly, he stood up. "Rosalind, waves that come and go, wasting, the gray skin, and white bands across the fingernails, across every nail, you are certain." "Every nail, Nathaniel, what?" They have a name, those lines. We call them Me's lines. They do not come from any fever, any wasting sickness, any disease of the body that God ever made. He turned to her, and his quiet voice made the little parlor colder than the October night outside. That man does not have an illness, Rosalind. Illness comes and goes as it pleases. This comes and goes as it is given. Each line on those nails is a dose. Someone is measuring them out patiently, carefully for 2 years. He drew a breath. It is arsenic. Your Duke is not dying, Rosalind. He is being murdered. The fine black traveling coach arrived in Milford on a Tuesday, and everyone who saw it pass agreed they had never seen anything so beautiful or so cold. It stopped on Church Lane, before the shop with the green door. Rosalind was alone at her counter, grinding willow bark when the bell sang. She looked up, and 9 years vanished like smoke. The woman in the doorway wore sable and wine-dark silk, diamonds at her throat even at 11 in the morning. She had aged the way marble ages, which is to say, not at all. She let the door close behind her, drew off one glove, finger by finger, and looked around the little shop, the jars, the hanging lavender, the worn clean floorboards, with the expression of a woman inspecting a stable. "So this is where you washed up," said the Duchess of Ashford pleasantly. "How wonderfully snug." Rosalind set down the pestle. Her heart was slamming, but her hands, she was pleased to observe, were perfectly steady. "You have thrown coins at my feet, madam. Nothing you do will ever surprise me again." "We are closed," she said. "Everyone keeps saying that to my family lately." Vivienne smiled and strolled along the shelves, reading labels. "I shall be brief, then. You have something of mine, Mrs. Whitmore, is it now? 2 things, in fact, my husband's attention, and my husband's." She paused delicately over a jar of dried foxglove. "Air. I have nothing of yours. I never wanted anything of yours." "And yet," Vivienne turned, and the pleasantness drained out of her face all at once, like water from a broken glass, and what was left underneath was the thing her 2 dead husbands had perhaps seen at the very end. "Let me tell you what happens now, girl. You will take your son and you will leave England. Boston is said to be tolerable. You will be given money, a great deal more than the purse you were too proud to pick up. In exchange, the boy vanishes, you vanish, and everyone lives." She drew the glove back on. "Or you refuse, and then I will show you what I can do to a friendless widow in a town of no importance, and you will discover, too late, that the snow they threw you into 9 years ago was a kindness compared to me." Rosalind came around the counter. She walked past the Duchess of Ashford and held open her own shop door to the street, exactly as she had held it for the Duke. "You are the second person from Ashford to receive this courtesy," she said quietly. "Good day, madam, and when next you visit the north, do not come up my lane." For a moment, something flickered in Vivienne's eyes that might, in another woman, have been admiration. "They told me you had grown a spine," she murmured, sweeping past. "Good. It will make this so much more satisfying." The black coach rolled away. Rosalind stood in her doorway, watching it go, and did not know that she had just been given the only warning she would get, and that the web had already been spun around her while she slept. The first blow fell on Thursday. Old Mr. Grimsby, a tenant farmer from beyond the mill, a man Rosalind had treated exactly once, for a winter cough, was suddenly, gravely, mysteriously ill, and suddenly, mysteriously, willing to swear before the magistrate that it was her remedy that had done it, that the widow Whitmore's bottles were poison, that he had heard, everyone had heard, that she had a past, that she had come to Milford under a cloud, that no one really knew what was in those jars. The magistrate for the district was Sir Hugo Marsh, a red-faced, weak-chinned gentleman drowning in gambling debts which, by remarkable coincidence, had been quietly purchased that very week by an agent acting for a great lady from the south. On Friday morning, Sir Hugo's men came to Church Lane. They turned out Rosalind's shelves into crates while half the town watched. They sealed the green door with wax and ribbon and nailed up a notice. Closed by order of the magistrate, pending inquiry into the poisoning of J.Grimsby. Poisoning, Rosalind repeated, standing in the street before her own sealed door, her voice strange in her own ears. I gave that man horehound and honey. You could feed it to an infant. You'll have your say at the inquiry, mistress, said Sir Hugo's clerk, not meeting her eyes. If it goes to the assizes, well, you'll have your say there too. The assizes, where poisoners were tried, where poisoners were hanged. The town did not turn on her, not all of it, not truly. Fletcher the blacksmith stood in the square and said loudly that he'd sooner believe the church steeple was made of cheese. Mrs. Pole wept openly. But fear is a fog. It needs no believers, only breathers. By Sunday, women who had blessed Rosalind's name were crossing the lane to avoid her. By Monday, someone had thrown mud at her windows, and Rosalind, scrubbing it away before Thomas could see, thought of her father's vicarage and the mud on those windows long ago, and understood that Vivienne had not merely attacked her. Vivienne had studied her. This was her old ruin, rebuilt to order. The second blow fell on Monday afternoon, and it was worse. It was so much worse. It came on church paper, carried by the parish beadle, who at least had the decency to look ashamed. A petition had been received by the church wardens, supported by persons of quality concerned for the child's welfare. It observed that the boy Thomas Whitmore was of doubtful legitimacy, that his mother was presently under criminal inquiry for poisoning, that the environment was manifestly unfit. It petitioned that the boy be removed into the care of the church orphanage at Lancaster. There would be a hearing before the wardens and Sir Hugo. In 9 days. Rosalind read the paper 3 times. Then she walked upstairs steadily, calmly, one hand on the rail to where Thomas sat by the window doing his letters, frowning in concentration, gray eyes narrowed, tongue between his teeth. "Mama, you look funny. Is it because the shop's shut? Mr. Fletcher says it's all rubbish and the magistrate is I'm not allowed to say the word he said." Rosalind sat down beside her son and pulled him close and pressed her lips to his fair hair so that he could not see her face. "They are coming for him. That woman is coming for my son." "Mama, you're squeezing again." "Because you are very squeezable," she said, in a voice that did not shake because she did not permit it to. "Finish your letters, love. Mama has some thinking to do." 200 miles south, in the great house, the Duke was losing his own war. Edmund had come home with a plan, and for a fortnight it had even worked. He knew now Nathaniel Gray's message had reached him at the Milford Inn before he left, unsigned and unmistakable. "Your Grace's illness is administered, not caught. Trust nothing that passes her Grace's hands. Trust no one in your house." And so the Duke had gone home and become an actor. He drank the 9 o'clock tonic into a handkerchief, into a boot, into the aspidistra when God was merciful. He ate only what the footmen served from common dishes, and with the little strength that came creeping back, he wrote secretly, urgently, to a new lawyer in York, a stranger owing nothing to anyone, come to Ashford. Bring what is needed for a new will and for a sworn statement of recognition. I have a son. He never learned exactly how she found out. A blotted copy sheet, a bribed clerk, Simmons steaming a seal, it did not matter. On the last evening of October, Edmund came down to dinner and found the table laid for one, and his wife standing at the window with a letter in her hand. His letter. "A new will," said Vivienne to the glass. "A sworn recognition." She turned, and she was almost laughing, and her eyes were dead as winter ponds. "You absurd, sentimental little man. Did you truly believe you would sign the whole board over to a shopgirl's brat while I sat embroidering? I built this. I bought this house its second life. I bought your name, I bought you, and you were the worst bargain of the 3. The marriage was real, Vivienne. Edmund was surprised how calm he felt now that the masks were finally off. "You know it. I think you have always known it, which makes you no wife at all, and everything you built is built on nothing. That is what terrifies you." For one instant her face convulsed, and then smoothed and became businesslike, which was infinitely worse. "Simmons," she said. They did not hurt him. They were far too careful for that. They simply helped his Grace, who was, after all, so very ill as all of London knew, up to his own fine bedchamber, and made him comfortable and locked the door. Word went out that the Duke's health had taken a grave turn, that her Grace was beside herself, that visitors, alas, could not be received. And the 9 o'clock tonic resumed, held now when he refused it by Simmons's gentle, iron hands. "Your health, Edmund," said the Duchess of Ashford from the doorway, watching. "You should never have gone north." It was the Dowager who cracked, the only crack in all that iron house. She came upon Vivienne in the study, coolly directing the burning of the York letters, and something in the old woman's face gave way at last. She had schemed, yes. She had lied and paid for lies and broken a girl she thought beneath them, and told herself for 9 years it was all for the family, for the name, for Edmund. "He is dying, Vivienne," her voice shook. "My son is dying above our heads, and the doctors say, but you, every evening it is you who—" The old woman stopped, started again in a whisper, "Vivienne, look at me. What have you done?" And her daughter-in-law looked up from the fire with genuine, terrible surprise, as one is surprised by a squeamish butcher. "What have I done?" Vivienne repeated softly. "Oh no, madam, you do not get to white now, who taught me this family's ways, who showed me 9 years ago what could be bought with a letter and a lie. You wrote the first act of this play, Your Grace, you and your hired penman from London. I am merely finishing what you began. The difference between us," she dropped the last letter into the flames, "is that I have never once pretended it was for love of anyone." The Dowager Duchess stood very still. Then she turned and walked out of the study, and up the great staircase, past her son's guarded door to her own rooms, where, for the first time in 40 years, the servants heard her weeping. But she said nothing, and she did nothing. Not yet. The night before the hearing, Rosalind could not sleep. She sat by the banked fire long after midnight in the small rooms above her sealed shop, listening to Thomas breathe through the open door and staring at the ruin of everything. The shop sealed, the inquiry bought, the hearing 9 days had melted to none. In the morning she would stand before Sir Hugo's borrowed conscience and be judged an unfit mother by the purchased word of strangers, and there was no proof in the world that she was anything more than what they said. A widow of doubtful story, with a fatherless boy. No proof in the world. She was reaching to bank the fire when the memory came the way lightning comes, all at once and from nowhere. Snow, iron gates, an old woman running bareheaded through the dark. Warm, strong hands closing her cold fingers around something small and flat. Hide this. Tell no one. One day, I do not know when, everything will depend on this. Rosalind stood up so fast the chair fell over. The chest. The old sea chest at the foot of her bed that had traveled with her from the vicarage, to the mail coach, to the room above the bakery, to here. 9 years, and she had never once unwrapped the thing at the bottom of it, at first because the sight of anything from Ashford scalded her, and later because the years bury what we do not look at. She dug now on her knees past her father's Bible, past Thomas's first small shoes to the bottom corner, to a flat packet of oilcloth tied with string, no bigger than a prayer book. Her hands shook so badly she had to cut the string. Inside the oilcloth, a single folded document on heavy church parchment. She unfolded it by the firelight. Copy, true and certified, of the Register of Marriages, Parish Church of St. Anne. The words swam and she forced them still, between Edmund Charles Ashford of the parish of Ashford and Rosalind Whitmore of Hartley Green, witnessed this day. And there at the bottom, in ink gone brown but firm as the day it was written, the curate's full signature and seal, and beneath it 2 witnesses. The first name she did not know, T. Adkins, sexton. The second name made her press her hand to her mouth. Margaret Hobbs. Mrs. Hobbs. Mrs. Hobbs had been there, had stood as witness at that quiet village altar, had signed her name to it, and had then watched, silent as stone, while the dowager announced to a warm study that the record had a page missing and the witnesses were so very forgetful. Silent because a housekeeper's word against a duchess was ash on the wind. Silent but not idle. She had gone to St. Anne's before or after and secured the one thing that could not forget, a certified true copy. And she had put it into the hands of a ruined girl in the snow and told her to wait. Rosalind sat back on her heels, and the whole world turned over slowly and settled into a new shape. The marriage was real, provable, legal, which meant she was no man's mistress and no false widow. She was the Duchess of Ashford, had been for 9 years, and every soul who said otherwise had slandered her. Which meant Vivienne's marriage was no marriage at all. And which meant Rosalind's eyes went to the open door, to the small sleeping shape, to the fair hair on the pillow. It meant that the boy those people wanted to carry off to a Lancaster orphanage tomorrow, the boy sleeping 10 feet away with his wooden soldier still in his fist, was no charity case, and no one's doubtful legitimacy. He was Thomas Ashford, the true-born, lawful heir to one of the oldest dukedoms in England. "Oh, Mrs. Hobbs," Rosalind whispered to the firelight, laughing and crying at once, clutching the parchment to her chest. "Oh, you wonderful, patient, cunning old woman, when the day comes, send for me. The day has come, do you hear? The day is here." And at that exact moment below her, in the dead silence of 2 o'clock in the morning, someone began to pound on the street door. Heavy fists, official fists. "Open, open in the name of the magistrate." Rosalind froze. Through the window down in the lane, lanterns, 3, 4 of them, the glint of the beadle's staff, Sir Hugo's clerk with papers in his hand and a closed black cart waiting in the shadows beyond, of a kind used for prisoners. Or for children. They had not waited for the hearing. They had come at night for her son. "Open, open in the name of the magistrate." Rosalind stood frozen at the top of her stairs, the parchment still in her hand, her heart hammering against her ribs like the fists against her door. And then from the room behind her, a small, sleepy voice. "Mama, why is there shouting?" And that voice did what nothing else on earth could have done. It burned the fear out of her in a single breath, and what it left behind was something older than fear and much more dangerous. Rosalind Whitmore stopped being a woman under siege. She became a mother with a weapon in her hand. "Stay in your room, my love. Bolt the door and do not open it until you hear my voice. This is a game and you are winning it." Then she wrapped the parchment in its oilcloth, put it inside her bodice next to her heart, took the fire poker from the hearth, just in case, and went down to open her own front door before they broke it. Sir Hugo's clerk stood on the step with a paper in his hand and 4 men behind him. Rosalind Whitmore. By order of the magistrate, the child Thomas Whitmore is to be removed this night into the care of. At 2 o'clock in the morning, her voice rang down the frozen lane like a church bell. "Does Sir Hugo do his lawful business at 2 o'clock in the morning, sir, or only his other business?" And Church Lane began to wake. A window went up, then another. Mrs. Pole, it turned out, had seen the lanterns pass and had not gone back to bed. She had gone to the forge. And now, up the lane, came Fletcher the blacksmith in his nightshirt and boots, carrying his largest hammer with the absent air of a man who had simply forgotten to put it down. Behind him came his 2 grown sons. Behind them, half the street, in nightcaps and blankets and righteous fury. "Evening, gentlemen," said Fletcher pleasantly, planting himself in the middle of the lane. "Bit late for visiting." The clerk's men looked at the hammer looked back. But it was not the hammer that won that night, it was paper. Rosalind stepped forward into the lantern light and unfolded the parchment and held it up before the clerk's face. "Before you touch my son, sir, you will read this. Aloud, if you please, so the parish beadle can hear it too. He is a man of God and will know church parchment when he sees it." The clerk read. His lips moved. His face changed the way faces do when the ground moves underneath them. This says," he looked up waxen. "Madam, this is a certified extract of marriage. He swallowed, between Edmund Charles Ashford, his Grace the Duke of Ashford and me," said Rosalind. "9 years past, signed, sealed, witnessed, which makes the boy you have come to drag to a Lancaster orphanage in the middle of the night not the child Thomas Whitmore of doubtful legitimacy." Her voice dropped and the whole silent street leaned in to hear it. "It makes him Thomas Ashford, the true-born son and lawful heir of a duke. So think carefully, sir. Think very carefully whose name goes into the record tonight as the man who put the heir of Ashford into a prison cart on the word of a bought farmer and a magistrate whose debts were purchased last Tuesday. Because I promise you someone will hang for this night's work, and it will not be me." Silent, long, absolute silence. Then the beadle, old, slow, God-fearing, took one look at the seal of St. Anne's Parish, and stepped backward off Rosalind's doorstep as if it had caught fire. "Not with my hands," he said. "Whatever this is, it's beyond Sir Hugo and it's beyond me. Not with my hands." The clerk looked at the beadle, at the hammer, at the parchment, at the street full of witnesses. "The hearing," he said faintly, folding his warrant, "will proceed in due course. Good night, madam." They went. The black cart rolled away empty, and Church Lane actually cheered in its nightgowns in the frost until Rosalind hushed them, laughing and crying because her son was upstairs winning a game. But an hour later, in her small parlor with Nathaniel and Fletcher and Mrs. Pole around the fire, Rosalind said the thing they all knew. "We've won until morning, that's all. Sir Hugo is bought, and by noon he'll come back with enough men, and the next paper will be an arrest warrant with my name on it, poisoning, remember. And once I'm in a cell, Thomas is theirs by tea time." She looked around the fire, and there was no fear left in her face at all, only arithmetic. "So we don't wait for them. We're done running from that woman. 9 years done. We take the fight to her house." "To Ashford," said Mrs. Pole faintly. "To Ashford, everything is there. The dying man who can recognize his son, the bottles being fed to him nightly, and an old woman who told me 9 years ago," Rosalind touched the parchment at her breast, "when the day comes, send for me. I'm done sending, Nathaniel, I'm going." Nathaniel Gray was already on his feet, reaching for his coat. "Then you'll want a doctor and my testing apparatus." He paused, and something glinted behind the mild eyes. "You do realize what we can do, Rosalind, if I can get 1 ounce of that tonic? There is a new test, Mr. Marsh's method. Show me the liquid and I will show a courtroom the arsenic itself, drawn out of it, plated on glass, plain as a mirror. Not opinion, not suspicion. Proof." "And you'll want a driver," rumbled Fletcher, standing up so that his shadow filled the wall. "My cousin keeps the posting stable. Fast coach, 4 horses, no questions." He picked up his hammer. "And perhaps a blacksmith. Southern roads being so dangerous these days." They were gone before the sun rose, the coach thundering south in the dark. A widow who was secretly a duchess, a doctor with a wooden case of chemistry on his knees, a blacksmith on the box with a hammer beside him, and a small boy asleep against his mother's shoulder, who had been told only that they were going on an adventure to meet someone, and that he should bring his best manners and his wooden soldier. 2 days of hard road lay ahead. They did not know they were racing the last grains of a man's life. Because at Ashford Manor, the spider had felt her web tear. Sir Hugo's letter reached Vivienne by express, and it was a letter written by a frightened man. The woman possesses a certified marriage record. The town is with her. She has quit Milford by coach, southbound, the doctor and others with her. Madam, I want no further part of this. Vivienne read it standing at her window. And those watching, Simmons, the dowager, grey-faced in the doorway, saw the exact moment the Duchess of Ashford stopped playing a long game and started playing a short one. Southbound, she said softly, coming here with a record. She turned from the window and she was perfectly calm, and it was the most frightening thing the old dowager had ever seen. Then we conclude tonight. Simmons, Mr. Lark is to be here by evening with the new Wildron Fair. Everything to me as sole devoted wife. His Grace will sign it at dawn. He will never sign, whispered the dowager. Vivienne, he can barely hold a spoon. A spoon, no. Vivienne was already moving toward her private cabinet, the one with the dark bottles. A pen is lighter, and a man can be brought to a state, madam, where he will sign anything to make the room stop hurting. Your son taught me that men will sign away anything if the price of refusing is high enough. He signed away a wife once. Or have you forgotten? She measured, with terrible domestic care, a dose into the crystal glass, a dose visibly larger than any before. Dawn, Simmons. And tonight, a strengthened tonic. His Grace will need his strength for the pen. And upstairs, behind the locked door in the great carved bed of his father's, Edmund of Ashford drifted in and out of a grey fog, too weak now to refuse what was held to his lips, and in his lucid minutes he did the only thing left to him. He hid his right hand under the coverlet, and he clenched it and unclenched it, over and over, keeping it alive, keeping it his because some animal instinct told him they would come for that hand at dawn, and that his last battle on this earth would be fought over a signature. The travelers reached the last posting inn before Ashford at nightfall of the second day, in the teeth of a rising storm, and there, waiting for them in the lamplit yard, wrapped in a shawl white with snow, stood an old woman. Rosalind was out of the coach before it stopped. Mrs. Hobbs. There now, their child. The old arms went around her strong as ever, and for one moment 9 years dissolved and Rosalind was a girl on a snowy driveway again. Then Mrs. Hobbs pulled back and looked at her, one fierce, wet, searching look, and nodded once, as if confirming a long-held account. You kept it. I can see you kept it. Good girl, good girl. Her eyes moved past Rosalind to the coach, to the small face pressed against the glass, and the old woman made a sound that was not quite a sob. And that will be, oh, saints above, he has the eyes. Mrs. Hobbs, how did you know we? Sir Hugo's letter came by express, and her Grace read it at the window, and the old woman permitted herself a thin smile. I have been reading her Grace for 9 years, child. I knew you'd come, and I knew you'd come this road. Now listen, for we have very little time, and I have a great deal to tell you. The smile went out. It ends tonight, one way or the other. The lawyer Lark came at dusk with a new will in his case. She means to have it signed at dawn. And the master, for the first time the iron voice failed, the master will not see many more dawns, Rosalind. She has stopped pretending. Around the inn's back table, by a shielded lamp, the old housekeeper laid out her 9 years of patience. First, a thick, worn journal in a housekeeper's small, exact hand. Every evening of the Duke's illness, dates, the 9 o'clock tray, what was in the glass, who carried it, how his Grace fared the day after. 2 years of it. A ledger of murder kept in the language of housekeeping. And this, said Mrs. Hobbs, drawing out a packet of letters, is the part her Grace never thought of, because her sort never sees servants, so it never occurs to her that servants see each other. She fanned the letters out. Mrs. Tilney, that kept house at Harcourt Hall for her Grace's second husband, and old Mrs. Craik, that kept it for her first. We are acquainted, we 3 housekeepers of a county are always acquainted, and when my master began to sicken, I wrote to them. And they wrote back. She tapped the pages one by one. Gray skin, trembling hands, wasting, white lines across the nails. A devoted wife who let no servant touch the master's evening cordial. Word for word, child. Word for word, twice before. 2 houses, 2 husbands, 2 graves, and the same 9 o'clock. The table was silent. The storm rattled the shutters. 3 husbands, said Nathaniel Gray at last, quietly. She has done this 3 times. He opened his wooden case, where the glass tubes and the zinc and the acids waited in their velvet beds. Mrs. Hobbs, can you bring me what is in the bottle she pours from? The old woman reached into her basket and set a small, dark, stoppered flask on the table. I decanted it this afternoon, doctor, while her grace was at her letters, and topped hers up with barley water. A pause. She served it to him an hour ago. He will sleep easier tonight than he has in 2 years and never know why. And so it was that at 10 o'clock that night, in the back room of a posting inn, by the light of a single lamp, Dr. Nathaniel Gray performed Mr. Marsh's test upon the Duchess of Ashford's tonic. The acid, the zinc, the slow flame, every eye in the room fixed on the little tube, until upon the white porcelain there bloomed, silvery black and unanswerable, gleaming like the truth itself, the arsenic mirror. There she is, said Nathaniel softly to the black stain. Good evening, your grace. There was one more stop to make, and the storm nearly killed them making it. Justice Sir Matthew Reeve, of His Majesty's bench, sitting the winter assizes at the county town 8 miles on, was awakened at midnight, and was minded to be furious about it, until the marriage record of St. Anne's was placed in his hands, followed by a housekeeper's journal, 3 housekeepers' letters, and a porcelain dish bearing a silver-black mirror, explained by a doctor with steady hands and steady eyes. Sir Matthew Reeve had sat the bench for 30 years. He read for 1 hour in total silence while the storm buried the roads outside. Then he stood up and began issuing orders like a general, warrants for the arrest of Vivienne, styled Duchess of Ashford, and the man Simmons, an order of protection for the person of the Duke, his own clerk, his own constables, his own coach, and dig the road out with your hands if you must. We go tonight. But the storm had its own opinions. At the great drifts by Ashford Bridge, the judge's heavy coach foundered, and men with lanterns swarmed to dig, and the clock crawled past 2, past 3, and Rosalind stood in the whirling dark, watching the manor's distant lights across the valley, and thinking of a lawyer arriving at dawn with a pen, and a hand too weak to refuse it. We won't be in time, she said. Not all of us, not the coach. She was already unbuckling the nearest carriage horse from its traces, but one rider might. Rosalind, Nathaniel caught the bridle. The drifts. I grew up on a horse. Dr. Vickers' daughters ride to every sickbed in the parish. She swung up, skirts and all, and looked down at them from the snow-streaked dark, at Nathaniel, at Fletcher, at Mrs. Hobbs, at her sleeping son bundled in the judge's own lap robe. Bring my boy behind me the moment the road is clear. And Sir Matthew, your envelope, if you please. She will not believe my face. She will believe your seal. The judge did not argue. He was 30 years on the bench. He knew a closing argument when he heard one. He sealed his orders into an envelope with red wax and his own ring, and reached it up to her. Madam, he said, Duchess, ride. She rode. And so we come back, at last, to where we began. The snow fell hard on Ashford Manor that night, harder than it had fallen in 20 years. Inside, Dr. Whitfield came down the grand staircase, wiping his hands, and whispered to the old housekeeper's deputy the words we have already heard. He will not see the morning. Someone must send for his wife. And received the answer that made him stare. Which one, doctor? The one who bought him, or the one he destroyed? Above them, on the landing, the Duchess Vivienne stood in wine-dark silk with the lawyer Lark beside her, a leather writing case under his arm, both of them waiting for a gray dawn and a trembling hand. Dawn was 2 hours off. Everything was in order. Everything was hers. And then through the storm, through the frozen hall, through 9 long years. Knock, knock, knock. Every head turned. Nobody moved. The knocking came again, iron-hard, unhurried, certain the sound of something owed arriving to collect. It was the deputy who opened the great oak door with trembling hands. Snow and wind roared in and the candles guttered, and there, on the doorstep of Ashford Manor, stood a single woman. Snow on her shoulders, steam rising off a blown horse behind her in the dark, her face hidden deep in a hood. "Take me to him," she said. "Now see here," Lark started down the stairs. "Her Grace receives no." The woman reached up and pushed back her hood. And 9 years fell away in the candlelight, and the deputy housekeeper's hand flew to her mouth, and an old footman by the stairs whispered, "God preserve us." Because half the older servants knew that face, had never forgotten that face, had watched that face walk out into the snow with nothing, on the worst night this house had ever known. Rosalind of Ashford stood on the doorstep from which she had been cast out, and she looked up, past the lawyer, past the frozen candles, to the woman at the top of the stairs. And she held up a sealed envelope, red wax gleaming like a wound in the candlelight. "Good evening, madam," she said into the enormous silence. "You once told me the clever woman knows the difference between a promise and a contract." She came over the threshold, snow falling from her shoulders onto the marble, and her voice never rose at all. "You were right, so I have brought neither. I have brought a judgment." At the top of the grand staircase, the glass in Vivienne's hand began, very slightly, to shake. For a long moment, nobody in the great hall of Ashford Manor moved at all. Then Vivienne came down the staircase, slowly, silk whispering on marble, every inch the Duchess, and her voice, when it came, was honey poured over ice. "How touching, the shop girl returns." She reached the bottom step. "You are trespassing, my dear, and you are mad, and you are leaving. Simmons, Peters, throw this woman back into the snow she came from. It seems to be a tradition." And here is the thing Vivienne had never understood, the thing her sort never understands until the very end. Nobody moved. Not Simmons, who was watching the sealed envelope the way a sailor watches weather. Not old Peters the footman, who had served this house for 40 years and who now, very deliberately, looked at his Duchess, and then stepped backward, away from her, and bowed his head to the woman in the snow-wet cloak. One by one, all down the hall, the servants of Ashford did the same. What, for the first time in 9 years, Vivienne's voice cracked in public. "What do you think you are doing? I am your mistress." "No, madam." It was Peters who said it, 40 years of silence breaking at once, quiet and final. "Begging your pardon, but I stood in this hall 9 years ago and watched this lady walk out into that storm, carrying what she was carrying, and I have been ashamed every day since. We all have." He straightened his old back. "You were never our mistress. You were only ever our punishment." Rosalind crossed the hall through the bowing servants, past Vivienne, whom she did not so much as glance at, to Dr. Whitfield at the foot of the stairs. "Take me to my husband, doctor." "You will not." Vivienne moved to block the staircase, arms wide, and for a moment the mask didn't just slip, it shattered. "He is mine. This house is mine. I paid for every stone of it." "Then let me tell you what is in the envelope, madam, since you are so fond of contracts." Rosalind's voice never rose. That was the terrible thing about it. The whole hall heard every word precisely because she never rose it. "Warrants, under the hand of Justice Sir Matthew Reeve of His Majesty's bench, who is 20 minutes behind me on that road. A warrant for the arrest of the man Simmons." A soft sound from the shadows, Simmons, easing toward the kitchen passage. "And a warrant for the arrest of Vivienne Harcourt. I will not call you Ashford. For the court does not, upon the charge of the wilful murder, by slow poison of arsenic, of Edmund, Duke of Ashford. Prove it, Vivienne whispered. It is proved. It was proved at 10 o'clock last night on a porcelain dish from your own bottle by Mr. Marsh's test, before 5 witnesses including the judge himself. The arsenic came out of your tonic like a photograph coming out of darkness, madam, a little black mirror. I saw your reflection in it. Rosalind took 1 step up the staircase, and now they were eye to eye. And that is only the newest page. There is a journal 2 years, every dose, every date, every 9 o'clock kept in this house under your nose by hands you never thought to fear because they carried trays. And there are letters from Harcourt Hall and from the house before that. She watched the names land, watched Vivienne's face lose its last color. Gray skin, trembling hands, white lines on the nails. A devoted wife and her evening cordial. 3 houses, madam, 3 husbands, 1 recipe. The housekeepers of England keep excellent records, and they all know one another, and you never saw them at all, did you? You never see anyone who cannot advance you. She leaned in, and her voice dropped to something soft and almost kind, which was the cruelest it had been all night. You should have picked up the coins yourself that evening, 9 years ago. It was the last time you ever had the advantage of me. Then she walked up the stairs past her, and did not look back. Behind her in the hall, Vivienne stood absolutely still, a spider feeling, thread by thread by thread, the whole web let go at once. The bedchamber smelled of candle wax and endings. Rosalind had thought she was prepared. She was not. The man in the great carved bed was a sketch of the man she had married, gray and hollow and small, his breath a dry tide, going out further each time than it came in. His right hand, even in the fog of half-sleep, was clenching and unclenching on the coverlet, guarding itself, waiting for its last battle. She stood in the doorway a long moment, this woman who had crossed a kingdom through a storm to be here, and found that the last 3 steps to the bedside were the hardest road of all. Then she crossed them, and sat down in the chair by the bed where a wife sits. Perhaps it was the sound of the chair, perhaps the ancient instinct of the dying that knows when the room has changed. Edmund's eyes opened, wandered, found her. And his whole ruined face flooded with light, and then with terror, and then with grief, all in the space of 1 breath. "No," he whispered. "No, I am dreaming you. I have dreamed you before. You always leave when I am here, Edmund," she said it plainly. "It is snowing, your roads are impassable, your wife is under arrest in your own hall, and I have ridden 2 counties through a storm. I promise you, no dream would go to this much trouble." A sound came out of him that was half laugh and half sob, and cost him more air than he had. Then, before anything, his clenched hand found her sleeve. "Say you know, say someone told you, the letter Pettigrew I never. I know about the letter. I know all of it now more than you do." She looked at him steadily. "And I must say something to you, Edmund, and you must hear it all the way through, because I will only say it once, and there is not much night left." He waited, the candles fluttered. "I do not forgive you." The words fell one at a time like stones into still water. "Not because I am cruel, and not because you have not suffered, God knows you have. But forgiveness is not a coin to hand a dying man for comfort, and I will not lie at a deathbed. You knew me, and you chose the lie because the lie was cheaper. My father died of that choice. I nearly died in the snow of it, and your son was born in a stranger's surgery to a mother with 11 shillings in the world. Those are the accounts, and they do not close tonight." Her voice gentled barely, but it gentled. "But hear the rest. I am not here as your judge is coming and soon, and it is not me, and I am not here for your conscience. I told you once I do not treat it. I am here, Edmund, for one reason only." She leaned forward. "So that my son, when he is grown and asks me, as he will, can be told that at the end, his father did not die alone. That his mother sat with him through the last of it. That is what I am, and it is more than what was done to me, and it is the only inheritance I fully control. Do you understand?" Tears ran down the gray ruin of his face, unchecked. "You came through the storm," he whispered, "to give my son a kinder story than I deserve." "Yes." "Then you are the dry tide went out, came back, exactly who I always knew you were, and I am the only man in England fool enough to have had you and thrown you away." His hand tightened on her sleeve. "Rosalind, is he here? Is he could I?" "He is an hour behind me, sleeping in a judge's carriage." She held his eyes. "And yes, when the papers are done, and only when the papers are done, you may meet your son." The judge's party reached Ashford before 5 o'clock, lanterns swimming up the drive through the failing snow. What happened in the great hall then, the servants of Ashford would retell for 50 years. Sir Matthew Reeve broke his own seal and read his own warrants aloud beneath the chandelier. The constables stepped forward, and Vivienne, cornered at last, with the evidence recited item by item and her lawyer Lark already scrambling to hand over the draft will and swear he'd known nothing. Nothing. Vivienne did not weep, or faint, or beg. She burned down the house on her way out. "You think you have found the beginning of this?" Her voice rang off the marble like something breaking free after long years chained. She flung out one arm, pointing up the staircase, where the Dowager Duchess stood frozen in her nightclothes against the rail. "Ask her where it began. Ask the grieving mother, who hired the penman from London 9 years ago, who paid 11 guineas to have filth invented about an innocent girl and put it in her own son's hands. I have the receipt, madam, you were foolish enough to pay by note. I have kept it these 9 years against exactly this night." She laughed, high and wild, as the constables took her arms. "Oh, I poisoned him, you righteous sheep, and I'll say it plainly since you've the mirror to prove it, but she poisoned him first. I only wanted his money. She wanted his obedience. She wanted her son on a leash, and she forged and lied and broke that girl to keep him on it. And every drop I fed him after, madam, was only watering what you planted." "Take her out," said Sir Matthew quietly. They took her out. She went laughing into the snow in her wine-dark silk, and the last the household ever saw of the second Duchess of Ashford was her straight, unbowed back disappearing into the prison coach, still magnificent, still terrible, still absolutely certain that the only thing she had done wrong was to lose. Simmons attempted the kitchen door and made it as far as the stable yard, where he encountered a blacksmith from the north leaning on a hammer. He surrendered with unusual sincerity. And on the staircase, above it all, the Dowager Duchess of Ashford stood alone in the wreckage of her 40 years' ambition. Every eye in the hall turned up at her, and no one said a word to her at all, which was, in its way, the worst sentence pronounced that night. She descended slowly, an old woman suddenly, and stopped before Rosalind and tried to speak, and could not, and tried again. What I did, you cannot imagine what it is, to watch a son throw away a name 400 years. "Madam," said Rosalind, not unkindly, which somehow made it final, "you have the rest of your life to explain it to God. I would not waste any more of it on me. He keeps better accounts." They did the papers at 5:30, by candlelight, at the Duke's bedside, because dying men do not keep court hours. Sir Matthew Reeve himself held the document steady. Dr. Whitfield and Nathaniel Gray stood witness that his grace was lucid and under no compulsion. And Edmund of Ashford, propped on pillows, took the pen in the trembling right hand he had kept alive under the coverlet for exactly this battle and fought it, and won it 3 times. Once on the attestation that he had married Rosalind Whitmore at St. Anne's 9 years past, lawfully, before witnesses, that the marriage record was true, that all statements ever made against it were false, and known by him to be false when he permitted them. Once on the recognition that the boy Thomas was his true-born son, begotten in lawful marriage, heir to the dukedom of Ashford and everything it held. And once on the will, the real one, 6 lines in a dying scrawl, witnessed by a justice of the King's Bench. Everything to Thomas, guardianship of the heir and governance of all Ashford until his majority, to my wife, Rosalind, Duchess of Ashford, who made from nothing everything of value that will ever bear my name. When the pen dropped from his fingers, the first gray of dawn was in the window. "Now," breathed Edmund, "please now." Thomas came in sleep-rumpled and solemn, his hand in his mother's, his wooden soldier in his other fist, having been told only that the sick gentleman from the fair wished to see him, and that this was a very important visit, and that Mamma would be right there the whole time. At the bedside, the boy studied the gray face on the pillow, and recognition dawned. "I know you. You're the gentleman I knocked down at the fair." "You are," whispered Edmund, "quite right." "I fixed you, though," said Thomas, a little anxiously checking his work. "I helped you up. I'm very strong." "You did fix me." The dying man's eyes went over the small face the way a man drinks after a desert, the fair hair, her smile, the gray Ashford eyes. "You fixed me more than any doctor in England, Thomas. I have been better ever since." His breath was going now, further out each time, and he knew it, and he spent what was left of it with a miser's care. "Thomas, will you hear 3 things from an old friend?" Thomas nodded gravely. 3 things was a serious number. "First, this house, everything here is yours now. It sounds grand. It is only a house. A house is worth exactly the people in it, nothing more. It took me my whole life to learn that. You have it now for free." Breath. "Second, when you are grown, men will tell you what your name is worth and what it entitles you to. When they do, go and help someone carry something heavy. That is the entire secret of being a great man. You knew it at 8. Do not let them teach it out of you." Breath, and now his eyes lifted over the boy's head to the woman standing in the growing light. "Third, the last one, the important one. Your mother," and his voice, which had held for the papers and held for the boy, finally began to break apart like ice in spring. "Your mother is the strongest and finest person I have ever known. Stronger than I ever was. Braver than I ever was. Everything you will ever need to know about honor is standing right beside you, holding your hand. Learn from her, Thomas, not from me. Promise, an old friend." "I promise," said Thomas, who did not fully understand and would understand completely one day, and would keep the promise all his life. Then the boy looked at the gray face, and at the window, and, with the frightening, effortless wisdom of children, seemed to grasp in some wordless way what kind of visit this was. He frowned. He looked down at the wooden soldier in his fist, his oldest campaigner, veteran of 1,000 battles, on the floor above a shop in Milford. And he set it carefully, upright, on the pillow beside the dying man's head. "He'll stand guard," Thomas explained. "So you won't be alone. He's very brave. He's never once run away." And Edmund, Duke of Ashford, looked at the small wooden soldier that had never once run away, the gift of the son he had denied, who was giving him freely at the end, the only thing he had ever truly lacked, and he could not speak at all any more, so he did the only thing left. He moved his hand the last inch across the coverlet and laid it over his son's hand, and Thomas, glancing up at his mother first, and receiving her nod, turned his small hand over and held on. That is how the 9th Duke of Ashford crossed his last threshold. At dawn, at the end of the longest night of the year's first great snow, with his son's hand in his wife keeping her word in the chair beside him, and a wooden soldier standing guard on the pillow. The bells of the estate church began at sunrise, slow and deep, telling the valley. They found her a little later on the front steps of the manor, the great stone steps, swept now, with the storm blown out and the whole white world blazing under a climbing sun. She stood exactly where a girl in a blue dress had once stood on a black evening 9 years before, with no cloak, no carriage, and a life just beginning inside her. The very stones from which a duke had said get her out, and a purse of coins had rung on marble, and everything had ended. Mrs. Hobbs came out quietly and stood beside her, and for a while the two women watched the sun take the snow and said nothing, in the way of people who have earned their silences together. 9 years ago, said Mrs. Hobbs at last, I chased a ruined girl down that drive in the snow and put a paper in her hand, and I prayed. I have never prayed so hard, Lord, let it be enough. Let her be enough. The old woman's voice frayed to a whisper, and look what came back up the drive. Rosalind put her arm through the old arm that had once caught her cold hands in the dark, and held it against her side. Below them, the doors of the judge's carriage were opening. Nathaniel was lifting down a sleepy Thomas into the bright morning. Fletcher was already making friends with the stable hands. Behind her, the great house stood with its terrible silence broken at last, her house now, to hold for the small boy presently discovering that the snow here came up to his knees. "What now, your grace?" asked Mrs. Hobbs. Rosalind, Duchess of Ashford, looked up at the tall dark windows of the house that had cast her out. "Now, Mrs. Hobbs," she said, "we open the curtains." 3 years later, spring came early to Ashford that year, and it came the way spring had learned to come to that house lately, through open curtains. If you had stood at the manor gates on a certain bright April morning, 3 years after the longest night, you would scarcely have known the place. The tall windows blazed with light. The gardens rang with noise, actual noise. Dogs, there were now 3, a negotiation Rosalind had lost by degrees. Village children, the gates stood open on Saturdays, another revolution. And somewhere beyond the hedges, the unmistakable sound of a 12-year-old boy laughing himself breathless. His Grace Thomas, 10th Duke of Ashford, was at that moment doing what he did most Saturday mornings, helping the gardener's boy haul barrows of gravel, coat off, sleeves rolled, entirely happy. His tutors had long since given up explaining that dukes did not do such things. His mother had overruled the tutors with a single sentence: "This duke does." He was growing tall and quick and gray-eyed, and the county was already beginning to say of him what would be said all his life: that young Ashford was the strangest great man they had ever known. He remembered every servant's name. He sat with sick tenants, and if he saw you carrying something heavy, God himself could not stop him from taking one end of it. Only 3 people knew that this was a dying man's third instruction, kept. On the mantel of the Duke's own room, where other boys kept treasures, there was a small empty space, dusted carefully around and never filled. His oldest wooden soldier did not stand there anymore. That soldier had gone into the dark with an old friend from the fair, 3 winters past, tucked under a still hand by the boy himself at the church door, so he won't be alone down there. He's never once run away. He stands guard still. Inside the house, by the great fireplace in the morning room, in the best chair, a deep, cushioned, throne-like chair that had been placed there deliberately and defended fiercely, sat an old woman with her feet on a warm stool, a cup of good tea at her elbow, and absolutely no work in her hands. This last part had taken 2 years of open warfare. Mrs. Hobbs, Margaret Hobbs, whose name on a piece of church parchment had toppled a duchess, had been retired against her will, with a pension she called scandalous and a suite of rooms she called ridiculous, and had responded by attempting to keep house anyway until Rosalind threatened in writing to hire a housekeeper for her. A truce was reached. Mrs. Hobbs would sit in the best chair like a Christian, and in exchange she would be consulted, formally, daily, on the running of the house, the raising of the Duke, and the moral condition of everyone in the county. She ruled from that chair like an empress. The servants called her Madam Hobbs and brought their troubles to her fireside. Thomas did his Latin at her feet and got his history from her instead, the true history of a snowy driveway and an oilcloth packet, told and retold until he knew it by heart. "And you carried it 9 years, Madam Hobbs, and never told a soul." 9 years, your grace. Patience is the strongest thing in the world. Stronger than Mr. Fletcher. Mr. Fletcher, child, is patience with a hammer. Of the others, the record may be brief as they deserve. Sir Hugo Marsh was stripped of the magistracy within the month. Once Grimsby the farmer wept out his confession, and the purchased debts came to light. He ended his days a bailiff's clerk, avoided by all decent company. Simmons turned King's evidence, told everything with the same neat thoroughness he had once put into spying, and was transported to the far side of the world, where it is said he prospered mildly and jumped whenever anyone spoke behind him. The trial of Vivienne Harcourt was the sensation of the age. The newspapers called her the widow of the 9 o'clock, and crowds fought for gallery seats to see the beautiful poisoner who sat through 11 days of evidence. The Black Mirror, the housekeeper's journal, the letters of Mrs. Tilney and Mrs. Craik, with her chin high and her face carved from marble. She was convicted in under an hour. She escaped the gallows by the narrowest of margins, her final cold bargain, trading the last of her secrets and the 11-guinea receipt for her life, and was walled up instead in prison for whatever remained of it. She had spent her whole existence collecting people who could advance her. In 3 years, the visitor's book outside her cell recorded not one single name. As for the Dowager Duchess, the receipt did its work. She was never tried, age and rank and lawyers saw to that, but London tried her anyway, in every drawing room at once, and the sentence was absolute. Doors that had opened for her for 50 years closed without a sound. She retreated at last to a convent in the far north that took in penitent ladies, where she lives still, writing long letters to her grandson. Rosalind reads every one of them first. The ones that are honest, Thomas receives. The ones that begin rewriting history go into the fire. There have been many fires. And Milford, because you will want to know about Milford, Milford thrived. The shop with the green door never closed. Rosalind had signed it over, stock and secrets and all, to Mrs. Pole's eldest daughter whom she had trained herself. But the sign was never changed by unanimous town refusal, and to this day it reads RWHITMORE, HERBS and Remedies, and to this day, if a stranger asks about the name, they will be sat down and told the entire story whether they have time for it or not. Fletcher the blacksmith was offered by a grateful duchess anything he cared to name. He thought about it for a full week and requested a new bellows. He received the new bellows, plus, to his lifelong gruff embarrassment, the contract for every piece of ironwork on the Ashford estate, which made him the wealthiest blacksmith in the north of England. The hammer that guarded a stable yard hangs over his forge door, retired with honors. And twice a year, spring and Michaelmas, the great Ashford coach rolls into Milford Square, and the Duchess and the young Duke come home, because that is the word they use, home, and there is dinner at the long table in the inn for half the town, and Thomas is knocked about happily by boys who knew him when he chased piglets, and nobody bows very much, and it is, Rosalind says, the finest society in England. Which brings us at the last to a garden and a question 9 years overdue, 12, if one is counting properly, and Nathaniel Gray had counted. He had never left, of course. Through the trial, the mourning, the rebuilding, through 3 years of Rosalind learning to carry a dukedom, Dr. Gray had simply quietly been there. North when she was north, sending letters when she was south, teaching Thomas to fish, arguing medicine with her by the fire, asking for nothing. Exactly as always, the whole county assumed. The whole county waited. The whole county very nearly lost its collective mind. It happened on an April evening in the walled garden at Ashford, among the first roses. They had walked out after dinner, as they did, and they had stopped by the sundial, as they did, and Rosalind was mid-sentence about a tenant's fever when she realized the doctor had stopped walking and was turning his hat in his hands like a nervous schoolboy, this man who could set a bone without blinking. Her heart turned over, she knew that hat. Rosalind, he cleared his throat. 12 years ago in a snowstorm, a woman I had never met nearly died in my square, and I have never in my life been so grateful to a snowstorm. 9 years ago, outside a green door, I began to ask you a question, and you, very kindly and very correctly, for that was not the time, declined to hear the end of it. And I told you I would be there tomorrow, and the day after, exactly as always. Do you remember what else I said? You said, her voice was not entirely steady, you said some things are not gambles, some things are certainties. I did, and I have now been there, said Nathaniel Gray, tomorrow and the day after approximately 3,200 times by my arithmetic, which is excellent, and I find I would like very much to make it official and permanent and to stop counting. He took a breath and abandoned the hat and took her hands instead, both of them there among the roses. So here at last is the end of the question. Rosalind, will you marry me? The garden was very quiet. Somewhere beyond the wall, a boy and 3 dogs could be heard, distantly, committing some atrocity against a flower bed. You should know what you are asking, she said softly. I come with a dukedom I hold in trust, a 12-year-old landlord, an empress by the fireplace, half a town in the north that considers itself my family, and a past that fills newspapers. I am the least simple wife in England. I am a country doctor, said Nathaniel gravely. We are famous for taking difficult cases. And Rosalind, Duchess of Ashford, who had been thrown into the snow and climbed out of it, who had built a life from 11 shillings and a memory of herbs, who had buried a father, raised a duke, unmasked a poisoner, and ridden through a storm to keep a promise to her own soul, began to laugh, and discovered halfway through the laugh that she was crying, and gave up the accounting entirely. I trusted a duke once, she said, and I lost everything I had, every single thing. She freed one hand only to lay it against his face. Now I am going to trust a doctor, and Nathaniel, I have gained back everything, and more than I ever lost. So yes, with my whole heart, which you have had for years, as everyone in 2 counties apparently knew before I did. Yes. They were married in June, not in the great estate church, but in Milford in the plain stone church off the square, at the bride's absolute insistence. Married among the people who had taken in a penniless stranger and never once asked about her past. Fletcher stood groomsman in a coat that fit him nowhere. Mrs. Pole and half of Church Lane cried from the second pew onward. Madam Hobbs sat in the front pew in state, in a new bonnet, and permitted herself 2 tears, both fiercely denied afterward. And down the aisle, holding his mother's arm with tremendous 12-year-old solemnity, in the place where a father gives the bride away, walked His Grace the Duke of Ashford, who, upon reaching the altar, placed his mother's hand in the doctor's, looked up at the man who had once brought him into the world on a snowy night, and said, in a whisper heard by the entire church, "You have to take very good care of her. She's very strong, but you still have to." "Your Grace," said Nathaniel Gray, "it is the entire ambition of my life." They lived, the doctor and the Duchess, the boy and the Empress, in the house with the open curtains, for a very long time and remarkably well. And so ends the story of the woman who came to the doorstep. The Duke of Ashford had a wife who loved him and a child on the way, and he sold them both for a fortune, and the fortune poisoned him slowly at 9 o'clock each evening in his own dining room. He gained everything he bargained for. It cost him everything he had. But the woman he threw into the snow, the woman who owed him nothing, who came anyway through the storm on the last night, so that a little boy could one day be told his father did not die alone, fate kept a different account for her. The Duke had sold her for money, but fate gave that woman the one thing on this earth that money has never bought and never will: a life of her own choosing. And if you ever pass through a certain northern market town and see a green door with an old name painted over it, and an old sign the town refuses to change, go in, buy a little lavender, and ask them about the widow Whitmore. They have time for the story. They always have time. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.